Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into the bizarre, sometimes gruesome, and unintentionally hilarious world of medieval medicine. Picture an era where most physicians were 1 part scholar, 2 parts guesswork, and 3 parts absolute nonsense wrapped in ridiculously oversized robes. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always find it fascinating to see our global audience tuning in. Now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for some ambient white noise, and let's take this wild historical ride together. Imagine you're a medieval doctor, radiating confidence. Not because you passed any exams, not because you trained under a master, and certainly not because your treatments actually work, but simply because you own a ridiculously long robe, can pronounce phlegmatic correctly, and possess a Latin medical text you skimmed once during a thunderstorm. You wake up in your timber-framed home just before dawn. The air reeks of damp straw, melted candle wax, and lingering regret from last night's onion-heavy stew. Your mattress is essentially lumpy hay stuffed in a sack. At 30 years old, you're considered a seasoned professional in this era, meaning you're just one unexpected infection away from permanent retirement. You stretch, cough politely into a cloth, because hygiene is for peasants, and prepare for another day of healing, a term you use very loosely indeed. No stethoscope graces your practice, centuries away from being invented. And soap? Please, you rely on the disinfectant power of incense and judgy stares. Your walls bear no official diplomas, but nobody asks. After all, you speak Latin badly, own 4 whole books, impressive, and once declared a man cured after he vomited in all 4 cardinal directions. Basically, you're a walking medical miracle. Dressing carefully, you don your signature woolen robes, proof you're educated, and an enormous hat, perfect for hiding the fact you have no clue what causes all these boils. Your medical bag slung over your shoulder contains knives, questionable dried herbs, and the faint hope that nobody asks you to explain how kidneys function. Today, like most days, you'll be examining urine samples, diagnosing humoral imbalances, and probably draining a pint of blood from someone with a toothache. No worries though, you've done this dozens of times, probably. And if things go south, you've got your trusty excuses ready. Bad air, sinful behavior, or Mars being in retrograde again. Worst case scenario, you recommend prayer and make a strategic retreat. You finish your stale bread, take a sip of weak ale, safer than water, obviously, and step outside. You're not just some peasant, you're a physician, a healer, a scholar. And absolutely nobody needs to know about that time you treated stomach pain with mashed garlic and pigeon feathers. That secret's safe, for now. Your day begins as all great medical careers do, by examining a warm goblet of someone else's pee. Of course it's not yours, that would be weird. This specimen arrived at sunrise in a clay jar, still retaining body heat because freshness matters in your scientific practice. You set it on the table like a sommelier presenting fine wine, holding it up to the pathetic light struggling through your smoke-stained window. Swirling the contents gently, you take a deep sniff and make that thoughtful hum sound that says, "Ah yes, clearly this man suffers from excess phlegm and possibly envy." Welcome to uroscopy, medieval medicine's golden standard for diagnosis. Color, clarity, scent, viscosity, and yes, sometimes taste. These are your primary diagnostic tools. Forget stethoscopes or thermometers. You've got 16 shades of yellow, a questionable chart from some Flemish monastery, and years of experience pretending you know what you're doing. Clear and pale? Good. Deep orange? Liver trouble. Murky brown? Probably excess bile or Mars punishment. Blue urine? Definitely witchcraft. Bubbles might mean impending death, or you might just tell the patient they're dying anyway, because people appreciate honesty. Sometimes you even warm the sample over a candle to activate the humors, like microwaving soup before serving. You record your findings on a wax tablet with Latin scribbles even you won't understand later. When the nervous patient asks for your diagnosis, you nod sagely, point dramatically at the jar, and declare something like, "Your collarbone is inflamed and your spleen melancholic. Avoid figs, loud noises, and women named Agnes." Then you hand them a pouch of mystery herbs, a dubious talisman, possibly a leech, and send them on their way, thoroughly confused yet somehow reassured. Because ultimately, curing them isn't the point, it's making them believe you could if you really wanted to. As a medieval physician, you don't bother asking about sleep habits, nutrition, or mold exposure. No, you ask the real questions. How often has black bile visited you this week? Everyone knows the body runs on 4 sacred fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Bacteria? Viruses? Nutrition? That's future nonsense. The human body is basically a simmering cauldron of medieval soup ingredients, and your job is making sure no single ingredient dominates. An angry, flushed patient? Clearly too much blood. Take some out. Tired and pale? Excess phlegm, probably from cold foods or conversing with morally questionable individuals. Yellow bile means irritability and vomiting. Black bile covers everything else: nightmares, melancholy, even poetry. Your entire medical approach is advanced plumbing with moral overtones, adjusting humors through diet, herbs, enemas, vomiting, bleeding, or ideally all simultaneously. If the body's hot and moist, prescribe cold and dry foods, because the solution to imbalance is clearly more imbalance in the opposite direction. Patients don't need logic. They need sage boiled in goat milk while facing east. Of course, no 2 doctors agree on bile thresholds, but that's fine. Professional disagreement makes you sound profound. You liberally use phrases like humoral discord and temperamental flux to cover knowledge gaps. The key is maintaining serene confidence while patients panic. And if they die, not your fault. Blame their phlegm, or maybe Saturn's alignment, or their sinful pre-consultation lifestyle. Either way, your dignity remains intact, because in medieval medicine, the humors reign supreme, even if nobody, especially you, understands what they're actually doing. It's not about healing, it's about balance, and sounding impressively authoritative while recommending mustard plasters for broken ribs. As a medieval physician, you're a firm believer in balance, specifically the delicate equilibrium of bodily humors. And when things go awry, whether it's a fever, headache, or particularly disturbing nightmare involving livestock, there's only one solution: bloodletting. No need for complicated diagnoses. Just grab a bowl, a blade, and summon the courage to perform before breakfast. The theory's beautifully simple. Blood represents heat and moisture. If someone's running too hot, too moist, or just generally irritating, draining some vital fluids restores harmony. Or consciousness. Either outcome counts as success. You might open a vein in the arm for routine cases, or go for the dramatic knee vein if feeling fancy. Neck veins, reserved for serious situations or particularly theatrical patients. Don't worry, you've got a handy 12th century monk's chart mapping which vein connects to which organ. Probably accurate. The monk seemed confident. Your patient lies down, arm extended, face already pale, though that might just be anticipatory regret. You tie a tourniquet, mutter some Latin for gravitas, and make the incision. Blood flows. You nod solemnly while your assistant faints dramatically, collecting the crimson liquid in a ceramic bowl. There's no precise measurement. Just keep going until the patient stops complaining or starts swaying. Some colleagues claim to diagnose illnesses from blood's thickness or smell. You mostly fake this talent too. For variety, you might swap blades for leeches, the medieval physician's multi-tool. Silent, reusable, and perpetually hungry, these squirming assistants are excellent listeners too. When finished, you bandage the wound, offer weak ale, medicinal, of course, and prescribe rest, but not too much, lest lethargy increase phlegm. If they walk away, improved. If they collapse, successfully purged. If they die, too late for treatment anyway. Because in your world, bloodletting isn't just therapy, it's a lifestyle choice. And you haven't even had your turnip porridge breakfast yet. Post-bloodletting, you prepare for the day's real challenge. House calls, specifically to patients wealthy enough to afford walls, servants, and the luxury of not dying immediately. Peasants make good practice, but they pay in chickens, manual labor, or tearful gratitude. Noble families, they compensate with coins, compliments, and occasionally awkward dinner invitations where someone's visibly expiring at the table. You pack your medical bag with leeches, ointments, cautery tools, and an assortment of dried herbs that all smell suspiciously like hay and despair. Ensuring your hat sits impressively tall and robes flow authoritatively, you understand this isn't just healthcare, it's theater. Arriving at the manor, a suspicious servant greets you but stays silent because velvet-clad men carrying knife-filled bags command respect. The air hangs heavy with beeswax, damp stone, and something boiled beyond recognition. A woman faints in the hallway. Nobody comments. Your patient reclines in a four-poster bed surrounded by tapestries and anxious relatives. Symptoms include fever, swollen foot, and absolute faith that whatever's in your mysterious jar will fix everything. You ask standard questions. Dietary habits? Bathing frequency? Never. Has Mercury been misbehaving near Saturn? Then you gaze meaningfully into the fireplace for 5 full seconds before announcing a humoral imbalance. Probably bile-related, almost certainly not demonic, unless symptoms worsen on Sundays. You prescribe something authoritative, perhaps a poultice of crushed mint and powdered snail shells. Advise avoiding cold winds, red meat, or excessive thinking. Recommend bed rest, which they're already excelling at. As you leave, the lady of the manor presses coins into your palm, hoping you're more effective than last week's priest who just splashed holy water everywhere and left. You nod solemnly, promise to return, and casually mention, if swelling moves upward, summon you immediately. If downward, call the priest instead. Your so-called medical bag terrifies everyone. More accurately, it gives people compelling reasons to flee. This satchel weighs heavy, not with hope or healing, but with an alarming collection of items that wouldn't seem out of place in a torture chamber. Yet this is your daily carry, your medieval physician's toolkit, your pride, and everyone else's terror, your portable cabinet of please hold still. Unpacking before each visit feels like a magician revealing tricks, if the magician specialized in pain. Inside lies a horrifying assortment of sharp, rusty, quasi-holy, and profoundly unhygienic instruments. First, your knives, not precision scalpels, just regular knives repurposed for surgery. Sharp enough to break skin, not sharp enough to inspire confidence. Some for cutting, others for draining, and one suspiciously similar to your cheese-spreading knife. They all look identical. Then come the hooks, for extracting infected teeth or removing things that shouldn't be lodged anywhere. Your amputation saws, cautery irons for sealing wounds with fire, and the trephination drill for relieving headaches caused by trapped spirits. Of course, you carry leeches, housed in a small jar, wriggling with enthusiasm. Each has a name, though you try not to get attached. A smaller pouch contains your ointments and powders, crushed herbs, dried lizard tails, ground antler, possibly some suspicious rock someone swore cured stomach ailments. Nothing's labeled. Guessing makes it more fun. There's also your urine flask, for diagnosis and occasionally paperweight duty when wind threatens your notes, and an astrological wheel for determining whether Venus is ruining someone's spleen today. Bandages? Rare. Soap? Theoretical. Clean water? What? You wrap everything in a cloth that hasn't been washed since the last plague outbreak, and pray nobody notices dried blood on a blade. Relic of Saint Sebastian. You explain smoothly. They nod reverently. You both move on. Somehow this horrifying, clanking, possibly cursed bag grants you authority. Walk into any room, open it, and people assume you know exactly what you're doing, which, in a way, you do. You're doing your absolute best, just without gloves or basic sanitation. You stride into the sick room, take one glance at the pale, sweating nobleman sprawled across the bed, and immediately consult the ultimate medical authority, the night sky. That's right, you're not just some back-alley bone setter. You're a celestial cartographer of human suffering, where no diagnosis is complete without checking whether Saturn's in opposition or if Jupiter's being particularly judgmental today. Your trusty zodiac chart, covered in symbols that would give any modern science teacher hives, gets unfolded with ceremonial flourish. Aries governs the head, Pisces rules the feet, and everything in between gets neatly parceled out across the constellations like some cosmic game of operation. Stomach pain during a Virgo moon? Clearly an omen, not for you, for them. You nod slowly, dramatically, while the patient watches wide-eyed as you mutter about Mercury retrograde messing with their liver. The stars, you explain with grave authority, control the body's humoral tides. Mars triggers fevers. Saturn brings melancholy. Venus? She's responsible for inappropriate swelling and awkward family drama. Timing is everything. You wouldn't dream of bloodletting during a waxing moon. That's how you get spontaneous fainting and marital problems. And God help any woman giving birth during a solar eclipse. That's basically begging for a limping, opinionated child. Remarkably, patients rarely question this system. After all, it sounds impressively complex and gives them something vague to blame besides your questionable treatments. You might even cast their personal horoscope to pad the consultation. Birth hour, rising sign, lunar position when they first sneezed 3 days ago. All crucial data points for determining why their shoulders full of angry bile. When delivering your astrological diagnosis, you adopt a tone of mystical certainty. Your phlegm is heavy because Venus is unusually damp this week. Nobody understands what this means, least of all you, but they nod solemnly, pay promptly, and thank you for your insight. Then off you go, stargazing leech wrangler, armed with nothing but a compass, a candle, and the blind trust of the afflicted. Now comes the moment you've been mentally preparing for since breakfast. You're about to carve into a man with the same knife you used to slice cheese this morning. Everything will be fine. It's surgery day, not because the moon's phase is favorable or the patient's humors are calm, but because the swelling has started smelling like overcooked onions and someone finally screamed loud enough to get your attention. Your tools are laid out with grim efficiency. A dull blade, a bone saw that's seen better decades, a wine-soaked rag. That's your anesthesia, and something resembling courage. The patient gets 2 things, a cup of ale and advice to bite down on something wooden while thinking happy thoughts. You reassure him with a warm smile and the understatement of the century. This may sting a bit. Translation: this will hurt like hell. As you begin cutting, the screaming starts immediately. There's thrashing. Someone faints, hopefully not you. Your assistant pins the patient down while looking like he'd rather be apprenticed to literally anyone else. A baker, a gravedigger, a professional turnip peeler. The wound gapes open, and you do what every medieval surgeon does. Poke around confidently while hoping for divine intervention. You might remove infected flesh, drain suspicious pus, or yank out a rotten molar with what appear to be gardening shears. Germs? Not a concern. You don't believe they exist. Infection obviously comes from bad air or moral weakness. Your tools haven't been cleaned since the last procedure, which was on a goat, but let's not dwell on that. Once finished, you douse the wound with wine for both sterilization and dramatic effect, then seal it with either hot iron or spider webs soaked in oil, both medically dubious but theatrically satisfying. Bandages get wrapped haphazardly while you advise rest, but not too much, lest sloth increase phlegm. If he survives, miraculous recovery. If he dies in 2 days, too late for treatment anyway. And if anyone criticizes, just mention how Galen once removed a gladiator's spleen with a bronze hook. He's still considered a genius. Because in your world, surgery isn't about success rates. It's about confidence, speed, and patients screaming slightly less than usual. When in doubt, apply leeches. Lots of them. Because nothing screams professional medical care like attaching blood-sucking worms to human flesh, and nodding like this makes perfect sense. You've tried prayers. You've tried herbs. You've tried slicing people open with all the finesse of a butcher on market day. But nothing establishes your medical credentials quite like administering live parasites while maintaining an air of scholarly gravitas. Leeches are your go-to solution, the Swiss Army knife of medieval healthcare. Fever? Leeches. Headache? Leeches. Sprained ankle? Broken heart? Unexplained ghost-related tremors? Leeches, leeches, and more leeches. Your squirming little miracle workers live in a special jar you've affectionately dubbed the chalice of wriggling horrors. Kept moist, irritable, and well-fed, but not too well-fed, lazy leeches are useless. The patient will inevitably recoil at the sight of these slimy black worms, convinced you've gone mad. That's when you explain this is an ancient, refined practice used by learned men in very expensive robes. You tactfully omit that some of those learned men were monks guessing wildly or barbers distracting clients from the smell of unwashed feet. Selecting the plumpest, most enthusiastic leech, they're like tiny gothic vampires. You apply it to the skin, behind the ear, or on a juicy vein. If it latches immediately, you smile knowingly. The leech confirms your humoral imbalance. If it refuses, you blame Mercury's retrograde and try again. Soon the leech swells with blood while the patient turns alarmingly pale. You pretend this is completely normal, making authoritative comments like, "He's drawing out the toxic vapors," or "Your bile was clearly rebellious." When the leech finally drops off, grotesquely engorged, the dizzy patient asks if they're cured. "We've taken an excellent first step," you declare. Translation: you have no idea, but the leech looks pleased. Because ultimately, medieval medicine isn't about results. It's about maintaining the illusion that you might know what you're doing. And nothing preserves that illusion better than creatures that do all the work while never asking for payment. As a medieval physician, your understanding of the human mind is, let's be generous, interpretive. You've got no psychology degree, no neuroscience background, and absolutely zero interest in examining the long-term effects of stress. What you do possess is an unshakable conviction that unusual behavior must stem from either sinfulness, supernatural forces, or preferably both. Your first patient today is a woman who hasn't spoken in 2 weeks. She stares blankly at walls, occasionally hums tunelessly, and once threw a spoon at her husband's cousin. In your professional opinion, clearly possessed, possibly by multiple spirits. Your diagnostic ritual begins predictably. Check if the local priest is available, sprinkle some holy water, the cheap kind, and light a candle that smells suspiciously like despair and goat fat. Then, with theatrical solemnity, you inform her family she's suffering from melancholia caused by excess black bile, or perhaps a minor demon named Gregory. Melancholia serves as your catch-all diagnosis for everything from sadness to poetry, from anxiety to any woman who reads too much. Treatment options include herbal compresses, useless, bleeding, harmful, forced prayer, demeaning, or if things get really spicy, an exorcism, entertaining. For the truly disturbed, there's always the monastery or local madhouse, essentially a glorified barn with a padlock and some moldy hay. Patients get treated with cold baths, whippings, and shouted scripture. The theory being that if their mind is broken, terror might shock it back into working order. Some physicians dabble in trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to release trapped spirits. You haven't tried this yourself, but you nod respectfully when others mention it. Bold strategy. Women receive special attention under your care. If one seems too emotional, she's obviously hysterical, a condition caused by her womb wandering through her body like a disgruntled house cat. Recommended treatments: calming herbs, cold compresses, and strict instructions to stop thinking so much, perhaps through marriage or pilgrimage. If the patient improves, divine intervention. If not, God's mysterious will. Either way, your conscience remains clear because in your professional view, mental illness isn't a medical condition. It's a cosmic inconvenience. And your job isn't to understand it, just to survive treating it without catching it yourself. You swagger into town with your ridiculous hat and Latin phrases fresh from draining some nobleman's elbow. You're undoubtedly the smartest man alive, or at least within walking distance. Then disaster strikes. Your patient is also seeing an apothecary. The audacity. Apothecaries, medieval pharmacists with more sass than sense, grind herbs, boil questionable roots, mix mysterious pastes, and somehow actually help people, which is frankly infuriating. They don't quote Aristotle. They don't consult star charts. They just hand out medicines that smell like regret and occasionally work. You, however, are a university-trained physician, or at least own a book claiming so. You don't stoop to menial tasks like measuring powders or boiling bark. Your job is to gesture at constellations, rant about bile, and prescribe vague concepts. Let the apothecary figure out what a cooling tonic with lunar influence even means. Yet patients keep trusting these herbalists. Why? Because apothecaries live locally, know everyone's secrets, and haven't accidentally bled someone to death this week. Their shops smell pleasantly of thyme and honey rather than singed flesh and clove-scented despair. The rivalry burns fierce. You consider them meddling amateurs. They view you as an overeducated rogue with a god complex. You accuse them of poisoning people with folk remedies. They accuse you of charging 4 silver coins just to mutter, "Your spleen's rebellious." Occasionally, you begrudgingly collaborate. You prescribe something vague, essentially a medical vibe, and they concoct something that might help, but definitely won't kill. If the patient recovers, you take credit. If not, you subtly suggest the apothecary didn't boil the mandrake root long enough. Ultimately, nobody wins. The patient ends up poorer, the town gains another health rumor, and the local priest claims divine intervention did all the work. But at least you've preserved your dignity, because in medieval medicine, effectiveness matters less than being the loudest, richest, and most intimidating option available. You don't need botanical expertise, just enough plant knowledge to make patients slightly less noisy. As a medieval physician, you're automatically an herb expert because everyone assumes you are. After all, you own a book with faded plant drawings and some questionable dried leaves in a pouch. Today's patient complains of inner churning, which could mean stomach cramps, heartbreak, or demonic interference. Rummaging through your sack of mystery flora, you confidently declare valerian root the solution. Why? Because it smells strong and makes people sleepy. 2 reliable indicators something's happening. Your arsenal includes wormwood for digestion, fleas, and annoying people, nettle for pain, mallow for inflammation, and mandrake, reserved for when you want to look mystical. It's mildly poisonous, wildly expensive, and vaguely human-shaped, perfect for impressing the illiterate. Truthfully, you've got no clue what most herbs actually do. Nobody does. You follow traditions, dubious anecdotes, and whatever the local monk swears cured his cousin's goat. You grind, boil, and mash plants with enthusiasm while reciting Latin phrases to sound official. Sometimes you add honey, not for medicinal value, but because everything tastes like dirt otherwise, and patients complain less when their spleen tonic doesn't taste like punishment. If the remedy works, you nod wisely. The fever yielded to the herb's cool nature. If it fails, blame the patient for not believing hard enough. In desperation, you might mix several random herbs together and hope one cancels out the other's toxicity. It's like gambling, but with more vomiting. You insist on foraging your own ingredients when possible because wild plants are clearly more potent, or at least dirtier, which adds rustic credibility. Ultimately, your herbal cures are 30% tradition, 20% guesswork, and 50% sheer bluffing. But hey, at least the patients don't scream when handed a cup of suspicious tea. No matter how much leeching, bleeding, or questionable herb mashing you perform, you're never truly working alone in your medieval medical career, because the church is always watching like an overly concerned parent who also happens to control your entire worldview and political future. Your patient has a fever? You could try a poultice, but first you'd better check if they've confessed their sins recently. Coughing up blood? Sounds like divine punishment. Better call the priest before even considering opening your apothecary pouch. Healing is perfectly acceptable, as long as you don't accidentally outshine God. You've been warned before. That time you miraculously cured a nobleman's gout with vinegar and hot stones had people muttering about sorcery. That other incident where you suggested planetary alignments might influence digestion? Borderline heresy. And when you briefly considered dissecting cadavers to study anatomy, might as well have proposed dancing naked with pagan idols. Of course, the church has its own healing methods, prayer, relics, and occasionally touching bones wrapped in gold cloth. You don't argue. You just sigh internally while making room for the priest to sprinkle holy water on your patient as you stand there holding a jar of crushed garlic in professional shame. Sometimes you even collaborate. You handle the earthly treatments while the priest provides heavenly reassurance. If the patient improves, miracle. If they don't, well, God works in mysterious ways, and maybe you needed more incense. You've learned to navigate this delicate dance. Every treatment begins with a perfunctory, "May God guide my blade," and ends with a firm "Amen," just in case celestial beings are keeping score. You keep a small crucifix in your medical bag, not for healing, but as a prop to ward off suspicion when someone accuses you of thinking too independently. Because let's be honest, you're a man of science. A vague, blood-stained, pre-enlightenment version of science. Just not the kind that questions church doctrine too loudly. If a limb is rotting, infected, or just generally offensive to look at, why not remove it? It's the medieval solution to everything. You've tried bleeding, purging, leeches. You've even attempted praying near the patient while waving a fistful of thyme. But the leg still looks worse than 3-week-old bread left in the rain. Time for amputation. This isn't a decision taken lightly, mostly because it's exhausting work and you skip breakfast. But when the wound turns black, the smell could knock out a horse, and the patient's groans have faded to ominous silence, you know it's time to break out the bone saw. The setup is simple. Find a sturdy table, recruit the strongest bystander to hold the patient down, and have your assistant fetch the amputation kit. One saw, one tourniquet, one leather strap to bite, and one enormous jug of ale, for medicinal purposes, yours, not the patient's. You explain the procedure gently, using reassuring terms like necessary, heroic, and potentially survivable. The patient turns an interesting shade of pale. You nod understandingly. You'd be nervous too if someone with your level of training approached your thigh with what's essentially a glorified bread knife. Tying the tourniquet viciously tight, you mutter something about humoral balance for appearances, then start cutting, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as the screaming reaches operatic levels. The saw works through skin, fat, muscle, and finally bone with a sound you'll hear in nightmares. You maintain your professional composure, mostly. Once the offending limb is off, you toss it unceremoniously into a bucket and immediately cauterize the stump with a red-hot iron. The smell will haunt everyone present for weeks. You blame the candle wax. Bandaging involves wrapping the wound tightly with linen and a silent prayer that infection doesn't set in by sundown. You advise rest, avoidance of cold drafts, and, if possible, not dying. If they survive, you're a miracle worker. If not, you solemnly declare the corruption had spread to the soul. Truthfully, it's brutal, but sometimes the only way to, maybe, save a life, or at least slightly delay death, while preserving your professional reputation. You hear coughing in the distance. Time to go home and pretend you didn't. It's been a long day. You've drained blood, argued with apothecaries, applied leeches to 3 confused individuals, and removed one leg with all the finesse of a drunken carpenter. You're ready to call it a night, until you hear it. That sound. A rattle. A wheeze. A cough that sounds like it crawled out of the underworld itself. Everyone freezes. You, your apprentice, even the leeches seem to tense. There's only one possible explanation. The plague is back. You've seen this before. The swelling, the black blotches, that distinctive smell of onions and doom. You remember the last outbreak. Your barber surgeon friend fled town in a cart. Your favorite baker simply ceased to exist. With practiced haste, you reach for your plague mask. Not because it works, it doesn't, but because the dried flowers and vinegar-soaked cloth make you feel slightly less doomed. Here's the terrifying truth. Medieval medicine has no answers for plague. You can't bleed it out, can't poultice it away, can't chant it into submission. Your options range from burning herbs to burning entire neighborhoods, only one of which occasionally helps. You consider documenting your observations, then reconsider. Better not be remembered for recommending garlic water as the cure for apocalyptic death. So you head for the countryside. Maybe visit a monastery, maybe take up winemaking, anything that doesn't involve open sores and ominous groaning. Because as a medieval physician, you know when to treat, and more importantly, when to disappear. The leeches writhe in agreement. The stars say it's time. Your robe smells like burnt basil and regret as you vanish into the mist like a medical charlatan with no solutions. The townsfolk will say he did everything he could, which is technically true, if you count doing it all from several miles away. Imagine walking into a grand medieval cathedral where stone columns rise like ancient trees, incense hangs thick in the air, and stained glass scatters colored light across the pews. Normally, you'd expect solemn monks chanting Latin hymns and bishops draped in ceremonial vestments. But not today. Today there's a man at the altar wearing a bishop's mitre, and he's drunk. His robes are inside out. His face is smeared with ashes. And he just blessed the congregation by mooning the crucifix before collapsing into giggles. Welcome to the Feast of Fools, one of history's most outrageous religious spectacles that the medieval church somehow tolerated for centuries. Held annually around New Year's, particularly in France. This was Christianity turned inside out, a sanctioned explosion of chaos where the rigid medieval hierarchy got flipped on its head. The premise was simple. Take Europe's most authoritarian institution and transform it into a carnival of parody for one glorious day. Choir boys dressed as cardinals. Low-ranking deacons elected a fool bishop or lord of misrule who presided over mock masses featuring flatulence jokes, obscene parodies, and occasionally live farm animals wandering the nave. Picture the church janitor becoming pope for 24 hours and doing everything backward while blindfolded and 3 sheets to the wind. That's the level of glorious absurdity we're talking about. Here's the shocking part. The church didn't just allow this, they hosted it. Cathedral chapters often organized the festivities themselves. Why? Because the crushing social hierarchy needed a pressure valve. Medieval life was all about obedience. Peasants to lords, clergy to bishops, everyone to God, or else. The Feast of Fools became society's one legal chance to scream, laugh, and mock everything that oppressed them daily. Participants paraded through streets wearing animal masks, playing obscene songs on lutes, and shouting blasphemies with the gleeful immunity of court jesters. Some rode donkeys into churches. Holy water got replaced with wine. Sermons were rewritten as dirty limericks. The air reeked of ale, candle wax, and glorious anarchy. But this wasn't mindless revelry. It was razor-sharp social satire disguised as drunken buffoonery. These people knew exactly who they were mocking, the elites ruling them from gilded thrones, and for one precious day, the joke was finally on them. Every kingdom needs a ruler, even one built on chaos. During the Feast of Fools, that ruler wasn't a king, bishop, or baron. It was the Lord of Misrule, a crown-wearing jester elected from the lowest clergy ranks, or sometimes the town's most spectacular drunk. Imagine this. A pimply teenage choir boy suddenly paraded through town on a makeshift throne of ale barrels, wearing oversized bishop robes and a mitre made of pig bladder, blessing crowds by pelting them with rotten cabbage. This wasn't improv, this was tradition. The Lord of Misrule embodied societal reversal. Everything solemn became absurd. Everything sacred turned profane. He oversaw fake processions where the gospel was read backward. Incense was replaced with burning shoe leather, and instead of hymns, participants meowed like cats or brayed like donkeys. The crowds loved it. For his 24-hour reign, he commanded absolute, if ridiculous, authority, leading mock ceremonies where cardinals were tried for excessive seriousness and sentenced to pie-faced humiliation. What made this dangerous and thrilling was how closely it danced with actual blasphemy. But that was the point. This wasn't random chaos. It was targeted rebellion wearing a jester's grin. Choosing a peasant or youth as ruler wasn't accidental. It mocked the divine right of kings and bishops' infallibility. By elevating someone absurd, people weren't just laughing. They were exposing how arbitrary real power structures could be. If a stable boy could wear the robes and mimic the rituals, how holy were the originals really? Church authorities periodically tried suppressing the festival's excesses, with spectacular lack of success. The Lord of Misrule kept returning, drunker and louder each year. Because as long as medieval life demanded rigid obedience, people would crave one day to break every rule. Every medieval physician needs a nemesis, and yours comes not in the form of disease or death, but something far more terrifying: medical licensing exams. Picture this. You've been practicing for decades. Your robe is stained with the evidence of countless procedures, and suddenly some upstart university graduate demands you prove you can read. Welcome to the 14th century's sudden obsession with medical credentials, the original bureaucratic nightmare. The examiners arrive unannounced one Tuesday, their pristine robes mocking your well-worn attire. They carry scrolls, quills, and an air of superiority that makes your blood boil, which, according to your humoral theory, means you should probably bleed yourself immediately. Their first test? Reading Galen in the original Greek. You stare blankly at the text you've been pretending to understand for 20 years, silently cursing the monk who taught you just enough Latin to sound educated. Practical exams are worse. They make you diagnose a peasant's rash while criticizing your urine flask technique. Shouldn't the sample be fresh? One sniffs, as if peasants deliver their piss on schedule. When you confidently declare the rash caused by Mars opposing Jupiter, they demand actual observations about texture and spread, the nerve. The anatomy test is your undoing. After years of pretending to know where the spleen is, they make you dissect a pig. Your incision looks more like a drunken stab wound, and when you proudly identify the liver as the big brown thing, the lead examiner's eye twitch could power a mill. The final humiliation? A written exam where you must describe treatments without using the phrase "bleed them" at least once. You fail spectacularly, but you're a survivor. Bribery works wonders. 2 fat geese and a promise to stop prescribing mercury enemas gets you a passing mark. The examiners leave with full bellies and empty morals, while you get a shiny new license to keep killing people, just with marginally better handwriting now. With your hard-won credentials and lighter poultry stocks, you face medieval medicine's greatest paradox: the patients who refuse to die. Take old man Gerbert, who's been at death's door for 15 years despite your best efforts. You've bled him, purged him, even tried that dangerous new electric eel therapy. Yet every winter he outlives another of your certain diagnoses. At this point, you suspect he's immortal just to spite you. Then there's Lady Ermengarde, who summons you weekly for palpitations that miraculously vanish when her young stable hand leaves the room. You prescribe cooling baths and chaste thoughts, knowing full well she'll ignore both. Her husband pays handsomely to keep these visits discreet, making you the richest celibacy advocate in the county. Children are your special curse. They survive treatments that would kill a grown man, then have the audacity to recover without permission. Little Agnes should have died after your milk of poppy miscalculation. In your defense, the spoon looked smaller. Instead, she's now the healthiest 8-year-old in the village, skipping past your window daily, as if to mock your prognosis. Even plagues betray you. That outbreak last summer, you prepared elaborate last rites for half the town, only to have them survive through sheer peasant stubbornness. Now they call you Doomonger McNally behind your back. The one time you optimistically predicted recovery, the patient died mid-sentence. This is why you stick to vague pronouncements about planetary alignments. Your greatest professional shame? The time you declared Count Baldwin's tumor certainly fatal in front of his entire court. Not only did he survive, the damn thing fell off during Lent, and he carries it in a jeweled box now, a walking rebuke to your diagnostic skills. You've seriously considered poisoning him just to save face, but knowing your luck, he'd probably thrive on it. Yet through all these humiliations, one truth sustains you. Nobody has better excuses. Patient recovered against all odds. My heroic treatments worked. Patient died following your advice. The humors were too far gone. Patient sprouted wings and flew away. Probably witchcraft. In medieval medicine, being wrong is only a problem if you admit it, and you've got Latin phrases to ensure that never happens. So you press on, your reputation bouncing between miracle worker and angel of death, depending on the day. The villagers may laugh when your 3 days to live prediction stretches into decades, but they still pay. Because in the end, medieval medicine isn't about being right. It's about being the last healer standing when the music stops. Just when you think medieval medicine can't get more absurd, along comes the greatest challenge to your practice. Women who insist on practicing medicine. That's right, the fairer sex has taken up the lancet, and frankly, it's ruining everything. These female healers don't wear proper robes. They actually listen to patients. And worst of all, they keep getting results. Take Matilda the midwife, your fiercest competitor. While you're still diagnosing womb displacement by zodiac signs, she's out here recognizing breech births by actual physical examination. Her success rate with childbirth shames your entire practice. Last week, a noblewoman you'd condemned to death in labor, after consulting Mercury's position, walked past your window, alive, holding a healthy baby Matilda delivered. The indignity. These women healers have the gall to use common sense. Instead of bleeding feverish patients, they prescribe rest and broth. Rather than drilling holes in skulls for headaches, they recommend willow bark tea, which somehow works. Their herbal knowledge puts your pathetic pouch of moldy time to shame. And they charge far less, being inexplicably content with chickens and gratitude rather than demanding silver and deference. The church hates them, obviously. The Male Physicians Guild hates them, naturally. And you, well, you're developing a complex. That peasant girl with the infected cut? You were halfway through explaining how Venus affected her humors when her grandmother smeared some green gunk on it. 3 days later, healed. No Latin required. Even your richest patrons are straying. Lady Isabella now secretly consults wise woman Agnes for her monthly pains, after your leech therapy left her anemic. You only discovered this betrayal when you overheard her recommending Agnes's mint and ginger concoction to a friend, a remedy you'd previously dismissed as peasant superstition. The worst part? It worked better than your boiled nettles. These women don't even have the decency to be formally educated. They learn at grandmother's knees rather than in proper lecture halls. They pass knowledge through oral tradition rather than precious handwritten texts. They treat the poor for free while you're still haggling over the price of a basic bloodletting. It's enough to make a proper physician consider actual study. Last month brought the final humiliation. Young Sarah, a mere herb gatherer's daughter, correctly diagnosed the miller's jaundice as a liver ailment while you were busy prescribing Mars-aligned enemas. When the miller recovered under her care, the village presented her with a wreath of flowers while muttering about your expensive uselessness. You've tried everything to discredit them, accused them of witchcraft. The bishop was interested until his sister got saved by one. Claimed their remedies were dangerous. Then the mayor's son survived poisoning thanks to their antidote. Even attempted to steal their recipes. Turns out Eye of Newt was just a plant you didn't recognize. The problem is infecting your own household. Your wife now secretly visits these healers, returning with suspiciously effective treatments for the children's ailments. Last week you caught your apprentice, your own nephew, taking notes from the butcher's wife about how to set bones. When you raged about proper medical training, the ungrateful brat had the audacity to ask why your patients die more often than hers. There's only one solution left: co-option. You'll invite the best local healer to assist you, then take credit for her work. You've selected Marjorie the Mendicant, known for her wound salves and sensible advice. She'll refuse at first, but you'll tempt her with promises of official recognition, meaning you'll let her do all the work while you keep the fees. The plan works beautifully for about 3 days. Then Marjorie starts forgetting to mention your involvement in successful cases while making sure everyone knows who to thank for the cured rashes and eased childbirths. Soon patients are asking for her by name, leaving you to handle the hopeless cases and corpse disposal. Your reputation is now split between that expensive quack and Marjorie's reluctant assistant. The final blow comes when the town elders suggest that you two form a partnership. Equal standing, shared fees. You almost swallow your own tongue protesting, but the alternative is watching your practice crumble completely. So now you stand side by side with a woman who never spent a day at university, listening as she explains, in plain language anyone can understand, how to actually help people. The humiliation is unbearable. The improved survival rates? Well, that's just salt in the wound. As your medical practice enters its twilight years, you face medieval healthcare's ultimate reckoning, your own mortality. The irony isn't lost on you that after decades of dispensing questionable treatments, you're now the terrified patient watching an even older physician prepare to bleed you with shaky hands. That ominous rattle in your chest? Probably just bad air. Definitely not the same consumption you've been misdiagnosing in others for 30 years. Your apprentice, the traitorous brat who now works more with Marjorie than you, has taken to leaving willow bark tea by your bedside with infuriatingly obvious pity. Even your once trusty leeches seem to eye you differently, as if sensing your vulnerability. The village whispers grow louder. Physician, heal thyself, they murmur when they think you can't hear. You've tried all your own remedies, of course. The mercury tonic that purged your bowels, but not your cough. The lunar-aligned bloodletting that left you too weak to stand. Even that questionable, powdered unicorn horn you bought from a traveling merchant, which turned out to be ground deer antler and did precisely nothing. Marjorie's honey poultice actually helped, but you'll be damned before admitting it publicly. Your library of medical texts mocks you now. Galen offers no comfort when your own urine shows the same cloudy doom you've been dismissing in patients for decades. That expensive astrolabe you use to impress noble clients? Useless for determining why your hands won't stop shaking. All your Latin phrases can't name what's killing you, though the town's children have taken to calling it karma. The final humiliation comes when the bishop sends his personal physician, a beardless university graduate young enough to be your grandson, who has the audacity to diagnose advanced age as if it's some novel condition. His recommended treatment? Prayer and resignation. You'd slap him if you had the strength. Where's the creativity? The theatrical diagnosis? The elaborate but ultimately pointless treatments that made medicine an art form? As you lie stewing in self-pity, an unexpected visitor arrives. Old Granny Hildy, the village wise woman you've spent years deriding. She brings no leeches or lancets, just a steaming mug of something that smells suspiciously like common sense. Drink, she commands in a tone that brooks no argument. The same tone you recognize from countless birth chambers and deathbeds where her kind actually helped people. Against all professional pride, you sip. It's foul but effective. Your breathing eases within minutes. Hildy mutters something about lungwort and time as she rearranges your blankets with hands that have delivered half the village. No Latin, no planetary charts, just results. The realization hits harder than any fever. You're being out-healed by an illiterate peasant woman at the one moment when being right actually matters. Your final days become an uncomfortable lesson in humility. The villagers you overcharged for decades now bring simple gifts: fresh bread, warm broth, the occasional herbal remedy that actually works. Even Marjorie, whom you've treated so poorly, sits with you through the worst nights, applying cool compresses and withholding the "I told you" so she so richly deserves. As the end approaches, you perform one last professional act, dictating your medical treatise to your ungrateful apprentice. It's your magnum opus, a lifetime of questionable knowledge distilled into one volume. There's an entire chapter on diagnosing illnesses by eyebrow thickness, 3 separate urine color wheels, all contradictory, and your famous zodiacal bleeding chart that's never once predicted anything correctly. The final page contains your ultimate realization, scrawled in shaky script. Maybe listen to the midwives more. Your apprentice bursts into laughter, thinking it a deathbed joke. But you know it for the hard-won wisdom it is. As your vision blurs, you notice the apprentice slip a small pouch from Marjorie into your medicine chest when he thinks you're not looking. Some traditions, it seems, will continue with or without you. Your last coherent thought? At least you're not around to see Marjorie prove how much better medicine could be without all your pretentious nonsense. The ultimate irony, your death might actually improve the village's healthcare. The bell tolls for your funeral, marking not just the end of your life, but the closing act of a medical farce that lasted decades. Your corpse lies in state, dressed in your finest robe, your largest hat placed strategically to cover the autopsy incision. Marjorie insisted on making for science. The villagers file past your coffin with mixed emotions, respect warring with lingering resentment for all those questionable treatments they paid for but survived against your predictions. Your successor, that traitorous apprentice, has already repainted your old signboard. Marjorie and Son, physicians and herbalists, now swings proudly where your name once hung. Through half-lidded coffin eyes, you watch him sell your precious leeches to fishermen as bait and repurpose your zodiac charts as kindling. The tools of your trade, so carefully collected over a lifetime of bluster, are being dispersed with shocking indifference. The funeral feast becomes an impromptu roast of your medical career. Old Man Gerbert, who you swore wouldn't last the winter of 1387, recounts surviving 17 of your certain death diagnoses while chewing loudly on your best roast goose. Little Agnes, now a mother herself, leads the village children in a game of guess what killed the physician. Plague leads the betting, followed by mercury poisoning and general incompetence. Even in death, you can't escape irony. The priest's eulogy praises your unshakable confidence in uncertain times, a diplomatic way of saying you faked it till the end. Your carefully preserved medical texts, already being used to prop up the wobbly tavern table where your former patients toast your passing with suspiciously good health. Marjorie, ever practical, turns your old practice into something revolutionary, a clinic where treatments actually work. She keeps one shelf of your old potions labeled placebos for nervous nobles and charges extra for the Latin incantations you would have adored. Your prized urine flasks now hold her effective herbal tinctures. The astrolabe you used for diagnoses holds down patient charts in the breeze. Years pass in this strange afterlife awareness. You watch medicine evolve despite your best efforts to preserve tradition. The new generation listens to patients, washes hands occasionally, and, most horrifying, admits when they don't know something. Marjorie's granddaughter pioneers a wound-cleaning technique using boiled wine that saves dozens during the next plague outbreak. Your old university finally updates its curriculum, only 2 centuries too late for your victims. Centuries later, archaeologists unearth your grave with great excitement. A medieval physician, they exclaim, carefully brushing dirt from your bones. They reconstruct your life from the artifacts buried with you. The faded medical bag, the rusted lancets, the suspicious stains on your robe. Academic papers are written debating your methods. Museum displays solemnly present your tools as examples of pre-scientific medical practice. The ultimate insult comes when your skeleton ends up in a glass case labeled Medieval Medical Misconceptions, positioned forever next to a cheerful diorama of village healers like Marjorie and Granny Hildy. School children press their noses against the glass, giggling at your outdated methods while their teacher explains how real medical progress came from the very people you dismissed. Yet as the millennia pass, you take perverse comfort in one truth. While Marjorie's descendants revolutionized medicine, your legacy persists too. Somewhere, in some modern hospital, a cocky intern dismisses a nurse's observation with Latin jargon. Some insurance adjuster denies coverage based on outdated theories. Some surgeon operates with unjustified confidence. The spirit of medieval medicine lives on, not in the tools or theories, but in the eternal human capacity for arrogance in the face of uncertainty. Your ghost finally fades, but your medical bag remains, a preserved relic in a museum basement. One day, a young researcher pulls it from storage, chuckling at the primitive contents. As she examines the stained leather, something falls out. Marjorie's herb pouch, slipped in at your deathbed all those centuries ago. The researcher sniffs the long-dried contents, frowns, and reaches for her lab equipment. 2 weeks later, a medical journal publishes an article about newly rediscovered medieval antibiotic compounds derived from common peasant remedies. The circle, as they say, is now complete. Years after the physician's death, his most loyal and longest-lived leech finally escapes Marjorie's clinic, slipping out in a nobleman's boot. The leech, let's call him Sir Sucks-a-Lot, has seen it all. pointless bloodlettings, botched surgeries, and enough bad diagnoses to fill a graveyard. Now, free at last, he embarks on a quest for vengeance against the medical profession. His first stop? The university where the physician trained. Under cover of night, Sir Sucks-a-Lot slithers into the lecture hall and attaches himself to the dean's ankle during a pompous speech about Galenic purity. The dean, mid-rant about balancing humors, shrieks and flails, accidentally knocking over a candle. The fire destroys half the medical school's prized library, including the physician's treatise on eyebrow-based diagnostics. Poetic justice. Next, he infiltrates the royal court, where a new generation of doctors bleeds the king for excess vitality. Sir Sucks-a-Lot attaches himself to the royal physician's unmentionables during a public bloodletting. The resulting scene, a grown man screaming, Latin curses flying, leech in a place no leech should be, becomes legend. Soon, the king bans bloodletting entirely, declaring it undignified. The real reason? The king's favorite jester whispered, "If a leech can humble doctors, maybe they don't know anything." Finally, Sir Sucks-a-Lot returns to the physician's grave, where he attaches himself to the skull's nasal cavity, a final, posthumous insult. A passing monk mistakes it for a miracle. Behold, the doctor's sins are still being drained. The leech dies fat and happy, having outlived his tormentor's legacy.